Aitäh, kiitos. Ja järgmisena räägib Pilvi Kalhama, kes on...
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to Pilvi Kalhama, who has been, among other work, the curator of Mägi exhibition, helped him in Copenhagen and Lillehammer, and wrote articles on him as well. Please.
Thank you. And dear First Lady Sire Karis and Konrad Mägi Foundation representatives and all the audience. So I'm really honored to be here, so thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to see you all here in this beautiful city of Tartu. Thank you, Eero, for your presentation and historical review about which surely gave us a lot to think about how these things affect even today. Although I have to say that no one begged me to show or investigate Mägi, I begged for Estonians to tell me more and show me more. So maybe things are changing. And thank you, Timo, for your very, very interesting presentation. I really hope that there will be connections and further discussions while we are talking about the same topics also, but of course from different perspectives a little bit. So there is my title for today's conference, and let's get started. In the heart of Estonia, amidst the serene landscape of early 20th century, there lived an artist whose work would challenge later on the status quo and redefine the boundaries of artistic expression. Konrad Mägi, a name not traditionally familiar to European art history, emerges today, however, as a symbol of dissenting thinking and the embodiment of the avant-garde spirit. Mägi's artistic journey was a relentless exploration of painting, of himself, and of the world, driven by a deep-seated restlessness. My aim is to understand Mägi's uniqueness as a painter in the modernist era. It cannot be stressed enough that modernism, as it evolved in the centers of European art, is today much more than just a term for some formal qualities of style. In the case of Mägi, we need to consider the true diversity of modernism itself, its local variations. In this paper and presentation, I will study three main areas while attempting to analyze the art of Mägi as a rupture of canonized modernism. The three aspects are here. First, traveling as a feature of restlessness. Then secondly, the question of the avant-garde philosophy of that time. And then thirdly, stylistic eclecticism as Mägi's legacy. And then I will have a conclusion. So let's go for the first topic about the restless wanderer. Konrad Mägi grew up in a time when Estonia was still under an influence of the Russian Empire. The young artist found himself caught in a cultural crossfire. The profound sense of not belonging to a particular place would become a central theme in his work, fueling his philosophical contemplations on identity and the purpose of life. Mägi's restless moves from one place to another, as we have heard earlier here today, and his state of mind was expressed in the letters he sent. They tell how he felt alienated in many places. In his letters, we can study how he analyzes the places where he stayed, as at the same time, he as often expresses his will to be placed somewhere else. Quote, "Paris is a horrible city where you can find anything. Finland is a paradise compared to Paris." End of quote. Well, this rather sounds a joke to me, but it wasn't about Finland, of course. It was kind of just a sense of being longing for somewhere else. Mägi was not the only artist of the time to feel alienated. In the history of art, the history of art reveals many artists in the northern countries and elsewhere who felt excluded and alienated when, for example, existential uncertainty was the main ethos in modern literature. The undertow of conflicting emotions and harsh circumstances is reflected in the work of the generation of artists who swore by their own feelings. For instance, images of alienation abound in Finnish artist Ragnar Ekelund's painting here of empty, only one of them here, kind of empty, wistful cityscapes. In some distant way, Ekelund's art particularly reminds me of Mägi's work. Mägi's alienation in the face of the world's metropolises is reflected by the fact that he hardly depicted any of the pace of the cities and streets, although the city life was a fashionable subject at the time in general. As Mägi himself put it, he wanted to fantasize in the silence and solitude of northern nature. Indeed, there is no modern architecture or technology in Mägi's works. Human figures are almost totally absent, whereas the works can include a winding dirt road, a lighthouse, a hydroelectric electric power station, or a barn, iconic signs of the rural milieu. An admiration for the vibrant and noisy city could have emerged in Mägi's paintings in Naples, Capri, or Venice, but instead he gravitated towards the static silence, even his urban views. And as you can see, the previous Ekelund painting, even the composition, as the other example Timo showed of other Estonian artists, so there were similarities adopted from the same era. In his paintings of Venice, for example, the crowds and the center of the city remains somewhere on the distant horizon, and the same appears in Capri works. However, I find the traveling itself as an enormous effect on Mägi's art, not only literally, but rather emotionally and philosophically. For example, the two periods he spent in Paris were very significant, even if he was unable to channel his thoughts onto the canvas immediately. Mägi's understanding of avant-garde art expanded in Paris. For example, the fact was that he first lived in a colony of 200 artists and hardly saw anyone else maybe there. A newly opened salon in Paris, which he saw, had 3,000 paintings on show simultaneously in year 1907. Having spent an almost pictureless childhood and youth in Estonia, he was suddenly surrounded by world art. That must have been an experience coming very close to one's identity. It would be narrow-minded for us today to understand that, of course, it wasn't possible to transform that all directly onto the canvas. At the same time, we have to note that Mägi was no exception in that he traveled so much. It was a typical thing to do of the times. The modern world was calling for an ideal of rapid transition, and traveling boosted the sense of disconnectedness. This thematics is, for example, discussed by Mark O'Shea in his writings about the anthropology of travel and placelessness. This is exactly what Mägi's art reflects, the shifting landscapes and rapidly changing styles. And his works are sort of snapshots of places seen by the modern individual, executed in a free and non-linear style. So to sum up this idea, Mägi's whole body of work represents the modern state of mind, traveling as a target state of being. Let's move to the second part of my presentation, the avant-garde ideas. Mägi's journey led him to the avant-garde art movement in Europe, where he encountered the radical thinking of the time. His exposure to modernist ideas in Paris and elsewhere made him to break free from the canons. Let's study a bit in what sense. As Finnish art historian Professor Altti Kuusamo points out, the system of French Art Academy was not only an important institutional player in the art scene of the day, it also led to the emergence of an innovative resistance on the outside. So these both sides. Non-legitimized and informal art schooling, which the academy system actually created itself, is a key point when talking about Mägi. The prestigious cosmopolitan hub of art was thus the outcome of a movement that was both self-correcting and self-critical. Self-taught, non-bourgeois artists arriving in the metropolis in search of a vibrant artistic scene made Paris, in fact, exactly what it was: an international, intellectually diverse and fascinating community of influences. For an artist just arrived from a periphery, as Mägi, Paris must have been a fascinating source of endless encounters and immense stylistic possibility. In this atmosphere, after Paris, Mägi used pigments to capture impressions of nature on canvas, but he used them in an imaginative ways. He followed the path of Matisse, who stopped painting things in authentic, realistic colors. Matisse wrote, quote, "To paint an autumn landscape, I will not try to remember what colors suit this season," end of quote. Mägi's paintings convey a similar sense of the modern artist's freedom to use colors and moods to disengage from the depicting of the actual nature and turning instead towards the vitality of nature in painting. So we can see that Mägi adopted elements and thinking from the avant-garde. He was no exception. But at the same time, he was a disruptor of norms and wouldn't adopt modernist avant-gardism as a linear or stylistic norm like some others. He adopted the avant-garde as an ideology in its purest forms, actually, I would say, by believing in challenging conventions and pushing boundaries of avant-garde itself. So paradoxically, as he was growing to be an avant-garde artist, he became a critical viewer of it. While many other artists of that time saw their position as artists breaking boundaries with realistic expression. But realism wasn't the war Mägi was fighting against. He was entering into avant-garde as a seeker of painting, a seeker of himself as an artist. The rebellious Mägi, as we know him, is easy to place into the image of a bohemian revolutionary vanguard, as Timo already was talking about. Therefore, he was an invention of the modern era instead of being an exception. He was looking for entry to the avant-garde from the perspective where he would be able to make choices of his own free will, not of the mainstream of the avant-garde. However, his lifestyle, as also Timo was explaining more in detail, his lifestyle like traveling, being poor, these rhetorics or tropos ethos, expressing himself suffering, associate a very common lifestyle of the time, especially the lifestyle of an artist. So to sum this idea, as Mägi traversed the European art scene, he was not merely searching for artistic inspiration, he was rather searching for the lifestyle which would then affect him as a painter. In the midst of his artistic exploration, Mägi grapped with the questions of purpose and disobedience. How is that seen on canvas then? According to Kuusamo again, emphasizing color as a kind of antithesis to the line was in those days linked with the possibility of adopting the identity of a bohemian artist. So color was some kind of a method. The idea that color could have been more than mere matter, the paint and color which we see on canvas, is actually quite intriguing. If color was a medium for expressing otherness, it also embodied a link to the politics of the subject. It is fascinating to think that Konrad Mägi may have adopted such an idea, that he could have chosen color painting as a means of constructing his identity as an artist. And it really makes sense since the formal styles were so dominant aspect among artists in centers of European art. Color offered a field more free. We can also pay attention to the fact that the colors painters use are pigments. That means pigments originating in nature are material, which links a painting to the living world and the nature. As David Batchelor writes in his book titled Chromophobia about colors and fears associated with them, Western culture has been quite active throughout the whole 20th century in denying color from culture, denying its significance, its meaning, and its complexity. As a consequence, color has become deliberating opposite to rational Western order. Color is something strange, something that tells us of the existence of instincts, of things that cannot be controlled. It is possible that taking color as a starting point of painting was a message, Mägi's very own visual manifesto. In the years of his active engagement with painting, Mägi made color an increasingly important part of his brand of modernism. He knew, either consciously or from intuition, how to use this cultural trope, which in the early 90s or early 20th century was known as Bohemianism. Perhaps it was his way of battling canons. Within this thinking, colors represent a sense of otherness and non-belonging in the mainstream, as it in Mägi's case was something very exceptional from most of his colleagues. Mägi seems to have been fairly critical eye on other artists throughout his career, and he did not shy away from questioning even those of his colleagues who enjoyed popularity. In Finnish Akseli Kalenkallela's case, for example, Mägi thought his status overrated, although he did express his views in appreciative terms and manner. Nevertheless, Mägi's critical stance is probably one reason he tended not to idealize stylistic choices or external qualities. Instead, he searched for the purpose of the artistic expression, considering what he saw in terms of his own development. This is a frequent theme in Mägi's thinking, and he therefore reserved his hardest criticism for himself. He was a true self-critical avant-gardist. To sum up this idea, Mägi must be looked at inside modernism and not outside of it. Mägi assimilated modernist styles with ease, and European movements do not seem to have been either irrelevant or self-evident for him in any way. In his biography, Eero Epner describes Mägi's desire to define himself not only as an artist, but also as an innovative artist. His criticism of Kalenkallela also highlights Mägi's ideas of art precisely from this perspective. Quote, "I still consider Kalen a great artist, although I used to hold him in higher esteem than I do now. Kalen has not added anything new to art," end of quote. Mägi writes this, so he was obviously preoccupied by the progressive nature of modernism and the development of avant-garde. In this sense, he was a product of his time, again. an advocate and a representative of modernism. All artists across Europe were busy developing abstract idioms of their own. The term modern itself meant updated or improved. The rapid development of styles gave rise to a kind of art race, which we have come to call as European modernism, and now we can see how Mägi was part of it. Okay, then we can finally move to a third theme of my presentation. Mägi's response to the avant-garde time was a fearless stylistic liberalism. His stylistic eclecticism, as I like to call it, a fusion of impressionism, expressionism, and symbolism, just to name a few, challenged the rigid boundaries of art. His restless spirit manifested in every brushstroke, every stroke a testament to his defiance of the ordinary. In this occasion, I have not time to take a look on Mägi's stylistic freedom, but I have gone through his body of work from this perspective more in detail in my essay, A Sense of Style in Konrad Mägi, The Enigma of Painting publication. I am only now summing up some visual remarks. Mägi's dots create a spirited impression, like in the French period work, as we could consider the first one in here. He distances himself from the demand for realist depiction, which the Impressionists actually still continued to hold on. The works break away from real-world impressions of light, and the colors became pale, light, and limpid. The works became increasingly self-contained, autonomous, painterly impressions, snapshots, and moments in a semi-imaginary landscape, like in the famous Sea-Kale work. Even though we want to know and Konrad Mägi Foundation wants to know which exact places Mägi painted, I think it's not about the specific place. It's about impression of the climate, of color, of sunlight. It's about impression of the geology, of the flora, and these kind of things, like in here, the Saaremaa study from year 1913 and 14. So for the viewer, this deliberate choice of style is secondary. The overriding impact is the atmosphere. The purpose of the line in the later works is different from that in his earlier symbolist works. In the paintings from Venice, for example, it tends even towards naivism, as well as we can see the resemblance with the Kandinsky color fields. And after these developments, the outlines disappear again, and so on, and so on. In portraits, instead, again, there is this very flattened, two-dimensional sense and feeling in a Fauvistic way. The stylistic diversity in Mägi's work in many ways violated the philosophy of his day of pure modernism. And this is the important thing with this, for me also for mentioning these different styles. By switching them, Mägi shifts intensity and mood on the canvas, and having the disturbance and dislocation the key features of his work. And for example, the other example here in the slide, Saaremaa landscape, is a very nice example of Mägi's eclecticism. Stretched sky is rendered in an unorthodox pointillist manner. Unorthodox, I emphasize that, so it's not pointillist, actually. And the fields in the bottom part are painted with thick, stylist, and distinct brushstrokes. So like two different paintings or styles or moods in one painting. I call this painting a very shameless one. From contemporary perspective, and I like to take this into this discussion since I consider myself as contemporary art historian and researcher. Mägi's solutions are really interesting from contemporary viewpoint, particularly in view of the fact that eclecticism as a concept only appeared in art in 1980s with the advent of postmodernism. The term denotes a philosophy that allows styles to be combined at will, like Mägi did. In postmodern art, eclecticism was an ironic way of mocking the modernist demand for stylistic purity in the past. The idea was to free art from the demands of constant stylistic evolution. In his time, Mägi was an exception who points to the way to a contemporary language of art. He was an unwitting early postmodernist, so to say, or in modernist terms, a true avant-gardist, a frontrunner, a trailblazer of local modernism. So we can come to a conclusion, and I have titled this part as Mägi as an avant-garde maverick. Mägi was unafraid to experiment. Mägi's art speaks to those who have ever felt the feeling of not belonging, the urgency of dissenting thinking, and the profound search for identity and purpose. Mägi's restlessness and reluctance to settle down for any length of time is seen today in the fusion of different impulses in his work. His life and work reminds us about original avant-gardism, not about the avant-garde which itself became a stylistic canon. Thus, we should call him as an avant-garde maverick. Combining the two terms, avant-garde and maverick, it refers to an artist or person who operates in an open-minded and experimental way in the field of art, while at the same time being independent and self-willed, often deviating from prevailing art trends and traditions. Such a person may be known for their bold and radical art that challenges artistic conventions and norms. It may well be that, especially because of coming from a periphery country, it naturally gave him this attitude and more possibilities to obey his personal views and feelings, not necessarily to obey the centers, which in the end paradoxically meant the building of canons, actually. So personally, I have started to look at Mägi's body of work as contemporary art. This viewpoint, of course, may raise more questions than give answers, like, for example, a question, when and where does contemporary art begin? However, for me, contemporary art is an attitude, and while I understand a certain radicalism of or self-critical view as a key feature of contemporary, of course, originating from the avant-garde ideology. I find Mägi very similar to contemporary artist attitude from this perspective, still admitting that in many ways he was a typical production of his time, as I have argued above. Thus, to conclude, we have contemporary art and the study to thank for the current situation, which we are able to reinterpret modern art in its all diversities with new eyes. Instead of continuing the categorizing of art, we are coming to the situation which might be called as an expanded field of avant-gardism. My formulation borrows, of course, from art theorist Rosalind Krauss' famous article, Sculpture in the Expanded Field from year 1979, in which she rejects the categorical approach to art in which each medium is governed by formal rules. Krauss wrote her essay by challenging the traditional, normative, prescriptive and classificatory concepts or simplistic analyses. Therefore, Krauss' thinking helps us see art as a stage for multiple and diverse interests and interpretations, as what Konrad Mägi represents. Thank you very much.